Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. My name is Martyn Warwick and we're on tour. We're in Phoenix in Arizona in the United States, where it's very bright and sunny, but really rather chilly, considering we're in the middle of a desert, or maybe because we are in the middle of a desert. Anyway, that's by the by. I'm talking with Sanjay, who is Senior Director Strategy Marketing Strategic Marketing at Genband.
That's right.
Sanjay, pleasure to meet you.
Nice meeting you, Martyn.
Let's start by talking briefly about Genband. Tell us about the company and why you're here.
Well, Genband is focused on enabling real-time communications and applications for service providers, enterprises, and creating solutions also for systems integrators and software developers.
Okay. First question then, how do you in Genband see NFV, Network Functions Virtualization, as being a core element in the network with SBC, transcoding and WebRTC?
Yeah, sure, Martyn. So NFV essentially is a critical movement underway to take what was in the service provider networks and enable that functionality in the cloud, utilizing IT cloud concepts in terms of not only the technology, but also the business models, the operations, etc.
Okay. So Sanjay, what do you think are the business advantages involved in the move to NFV?
So there's multiple aspects of why the service providers want to implement NFV and cloud technologies, right? One is it's all about services agility. Today, the service providers take of the order of 16 to 18 months to deploy any new service. What NFV promises to do is to reduce that time interval to in the order of days and weeks rather than months. Right? So that's one key reason for moving towards NFV and the cloud. Another big reason is to address what we call the total cost of ownership in terms of what it takes to maintain and evolve networks. And so in terms of new business models that the service providers want to implement, they need new approaches to how their networks are built, maintained, operated, and the business models that they pursue from that. So number three is it's about, today the service providers are tied to what we call a vertical approach to, functions and deploying functions in the network. They go and purchase hardware and software from each different vendor for each different function, and now they have to maintain, they have to service that component, they have to train their folks on it, and then they have to upgrade those components. And so that vertical approach slows things down tremendously. And what NFV and cloud do for the service providers is make that a more horizontal approach using the cloud efficiencies in terms of common hardware and resources being utilized for these network functions.
Okay, let's look to the past briefly to inform the future. How do you see the interlock between the sort of hardware dependency you had in the old style of delivery to the new style of delivery based on NFV and SDN?
Well, so the old style, again, like I said, it was more a vertical approach, and then each function had to, so to speak, engineer to peak capacity. Let me give you an example. Think about, so Mother's Day typically is a day where there's tremendous amount of traffic in terms of communications. Sure. In today's networks, all the functions have to be engineered to address Mother's Day capacity, and so when Mother's Day is not happening, that capacity is laying idle. In the cloud, the concept is that you press a button on demand right the day before Mother's Day, utilize the common cloud capacity to scale up, so to speak, or scale out, and make that capacity available for Mother's Day. Once Mother's Day is over, you press another button, and now you've freed up all those resources for other uses.
Okay, do you think then that virtualized platforms can deliver the performance and the availability and the reliability that that implies?
Yes, absolutely. What we're seeing is today's performance curves on today's servers certainly do meet a lot of the requirements. And there's different aspects of the technologies in terms of what we call signaling and control plane versus the media plane. And then there's technologies and offerings from the likes of Intel, which bring things like what we call data plane development kits to help with the performance aspects for data plane and media plane as well. So yeah, I mean, there's no concerns right now in terms of the performance of the hardware or servers to be able to meet the needs of the vision of NFV.
Okay, now you're in strategic partnership with HP in this area. How does that partnership work? How does it help Genband in transitioning to the new world of NFV?
Absolutely. So we're what we call a technology partner within HP's HP Open NFV ecosystem program. And what this enables us to do is really innovate together within the context of an ecosystem. And so we're pretty big on ecosystems in general. And it's about innovation and bringing differentiated and integrated solutions to the service providers for NFV deployments.
There's been, well, let's put it like this. NFV sprang out of nowhere and became very big very quickly. There has been a degree of hype around it, although we're now seeing that hype settling and we're seeing reality obtruding into that. And it seems that NFV and SDN have a very genuine future and will be very important to the networks of the future. But what do you think is the largest area of concern that will actually impede the deployment of NFV?
Well, the concern is, given as we wait for the standards to evolve and get completed, which does take time, right, to gain consensus across different vendor communities as well as service provider communities. So the concern there is getting in place proprietary solutions versus more open and interoperable solutions to market. So that's one area of concern that I have in terms of deployments of NFV.
Thank you. There's been also a lot of emphasis latterly towards the end of phase 1 of NFV, which has just happened, and we're just at the beginning of phase 2. Huge emphasis on proof of concepts, POC. And it's being done all over the world by various companies. What do you think it will take to move the technology on from proof of concept stage into proper working field trials?
Well, I think the key to that is it's a multifaceted thing, right? I think some of the ecosystems that are inherently that have been formed, both in terms of the vendor community as well as the service provider communities, and actually taking integrated solutions and interoperable solutions and taking them to the trial phase from the proof of concept phase and going through that process. So taking it from paper and demos to actual deployment trials, because really the learnings from those are invaluable and will expedite the eventual deployments for NFV.
We talked about phase 1 of NFV. So a couple of years ago, nothing. Suddenly, we're at the end of phase 1. The mandate for ETSI NFV continues for at least a further 2 years. So there's a lot more development work to be done. Did phase 1 meet your expectations and hopes? And if not, why not?
Yes and no. It did, because think about where we were 2 years ago. Nobody knew what NFV was. Nobody knew what the terminology meant. Nobody really knew what orchestration was in terms of applying that to carrier networks and service provider networks. So we've come a long way over the last 2 years, not only in terms of having everyone talking the same language, and they may not agree on every interface and spec, right? But certainly, there's a common understanding of the goals and the requirements for NFV, as well as the proof of concepts that have occurred have generated tremendous amount of learnings in the community. So it's been pretty successful in terms of those aspects, right? The hope, of course, is that phase 2 takes us to the next step and gets a lot of some of the open questions still remaining in terms of interfaces and lots of technical interoperability aspects and open environments, right? So the hope is that phase 2 gets us over that hump to take us fully into what we call open interoperable based NFV systems.
A final question to you. What about the proliferation of standards bodies that we're seeing at the moment? A couple of years ago when this started, there was ETSI and a couple of other honourable mentions, and we've seen more and more new ones appearing as NFV and SDN gets more publicity and becomes more real. What do you make of that? Do you think there's a degree of opportunism taking place here and people are saying, oh, I wouldn't have done that when this was a dodgy proposition, we might not come to anything, but now it seems as though there's going to be money to be made. We're going to form our own little body and we're going to become a standards body in our own right.
Yeah, I mean, there is some of that. I mean, a lot of, what you're referring to in terms of, new communities or standards organizations being formed, right? They're all looking at specific aspects of the deployments and technology, right? So they're being created to address specific needs within the overall context, right? But what I see ETSI doing is bringing all these piece parts in a coherent mechanism and into the market, right? And providing guidelines for those common approaches. So that's where I see the work continuing to be very valuable to both the service provider and the vendor communities.
Okay, Sanjay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Martyn.